see a few new names. So thank you so much for joining. I'm gonna just go ahead and get started and just have people kind of come in as they join. But I think we have a action-packed event today, just full of talking about mental health and breaking it down with our lovely guest speaker, Meg. Already blanking on how to pronounce it. Help me, Meg.
McElwain.
McElwain. Perfect. Okay. So before we get right into today's topic, I like to start, if you have joined us before, I like to get us started with some icebreaker questions, just so you all can get to know her and just kind of get to know her more in a fun way rather than like, what's her title? What is she doing for her job and stuff like that. So Meg, if you're ready to jump into the icebreaker questions.
I'm ready.
Perfect. So to start, what is your favorite way to relax?
I would say the beach or to be in the sun. I really enjoy the sun.
Okay. Do you have a favorite beach that you like to go to?
I really like the beaches around Charleston because you can also go into the city. So, but I love the North Carolina beaches too because they're just slow and quiet. I mean, anywhere that's slow is good for me.
Yeah. Okay. Next question. If you could be anywhere in the world right now, where would you be?
I probably would choose to be visiting my home state of Mississippi because it's been so long since I've seen my friends and family. So given with COVID, but otherwise I would say the beach.
Okay. Good answer. What is one emotion that you feel strongly most of the time?
Probably happiness, and I'm very hopeful. So I think at this stage of my life, I mean, of course that has varied with different times in my life, but right now happiness and hope. So that's two.
Oh, that's awesome. You're such a ray of light, Meg.
You're
Um,
sweet.
and then our last question, before you leave this world, what is the one thing you hope to accomplish?
I want to become a grandparent. I want to see my living son grow up, find someone that is his life partner that makes him happy, and have a family. That's what I would like to see.
That's so beautiful that your answer like didn't even revolve, about you, but it was about your family. That just shows just how loving and wholesome you are. So that's awesome. So I hope you all got to know Meg a little bit better. So now we can just go ahead and jump into today's topic. But actually, before we jump into mental health, Meg, just briefly fill us in. Describe yourself. What are you currently working on? Yeah, take it away.
Well, I am a professional woman in my mid 40s, so that'll kind of give y'all an age. I am currently the executive director of Mitchell's Fund. Previously, I owned a marketing agency for about 16 years, so I have a lot of background in marketing and communication. I'm an over communicator. I've been in Charlotte for 23 years, which is crazy. I'm mother to a living son who will be 12 tomorrow. And I'm active in my community. I enjoy, spending time around my church. I enjoy being out, but I also enjoy being at home.
Yeah. Awesome. So can you tell us a little bit more about Mitchell's Fun and because I think that's really the reason that we're all here is to learn a little bit more about your story. So yeah, just describe to us a little bit about Mitchell's Fun and what made you open it.
Okay. So Mitchell is my late son. He was here from 2012 to 2014. He was born healthy, and at 3 months, he was diagnosed with a rare cancer, childhood cancer, and given a 40% chance of survival. It was just the diagnosis itself was highly traumatic. And then, you take that I was just barely postpartum, 3 months. It was a hard time physically for me. Because any of you women out there who've had a baby know that the hormonal changes are really hard. But he was diagnosed at 3 months. We really believed that he would win the fight, and unfortunately he did not. He died right after his second birthday. Again, the long illness was traumatic. There were lots of different things that happened. My minister has has compared it to someone who's on the front lines of war, because, you know, in any given day, we could have 3 major traumas just from his treatment, because childhood cancer is much more intense than adult treatment. So we founded Mitchell's Fund not long after diagnosis, because we realized with my former husband, Mitchell's dad, we had insurance with 100% coverage, which is highly, it's very rare. And we had lots of people in the community who wanted to raise money for us and who were already donating money. So we created Mitchell's Fund as a vessel to capture that. We started as part of the Novant Health Foundation. That's where Mitchell was treated, was at Novant. And we have moved into our own 501c3 in the past 3 years. We have pivoted our mission. We started as a way to help families while they were in treatment with their mortgage, their cars. We've paid funeral expenses, just living expenses. But there are lots of groups that do that. And we really saw the need for mental health. And so now our work is focused in helping children and families who have experienced trauma. Our key project is a counselor position who works in the St. Jude affiliate clinic at Novant. A lot of people don't know we have a St. Jude affiliate here, but the clinic, but we have a counselor who does play, talk, and art therapy. And the primary focus is on the child, but they also do a lot of work with the families, and they help with that shock that comes with diagnosis. And I just can't tell out treatment with pain, anxiety, just whatever they're bringing to the clinic, whatever they need to talk about. And then in some cases helps them prepare for the end of life. And unfortunately, with childhood cancer, that happens more often than, you would think.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit more about how you were able to stay, strong and resilient through a lot of, the trauma that you experienced, going through this experience with Mitchell.
Well, I think, like all of us, I have adverse childhood experiences, but mine are not highly traumatic. My parents divorced when I was young, but I was raised in a fairly stable, loving home. We were part of a community of faith. I personally, my Christian faith is very important to me. And so I think I did not come to the table, if you will, with a lot of heavy trauma before. So that helped. I have battled depression and anxiety most of my adult life, but I also did not have a severe mental diagnosis like bipolar or something that was a little bit harder to manage. So I think that those things coming to where I am now, because what I deal with now is what's known as acute grief. It has gotten better. I do have PTSD and have things I've pretty aware of what my triggers are. Mm-hmm. And so I try to educate the people around me. I try to make sure I keep myself in a stable environment. But, I had a great medical team. I was medicated. I'm very, very open about the fact that I still take medication daily. I don't know that I could do without it. I had great therapists around me. My minister and I are very close. And of course, clergy often function as a therapist as well. Mm-hmm. So we had a good medical team. I've always been a look on the bright side kind of person. And I really don't know. I think that helped me. When something bad happens, I always try to find the good. Mm-hmm. It's just part of my personality. And I realize not everybody has that, but that is part of kind of how I've lived my life.
Yeah. So just to back up just a little bit, because I know you didn't go too much into it, and we definitely don't have to if you are not wanting to. But you mentioned kind of some things that had happened, in your childhood. So you kind of had an experience of mental health issues prior to this really traumatic experience. So just to kind of back up, like, what is mental health for you? But then how did it affect you, growing up, and then just in your life, both personally as well as just professionally?
Well, I think first of all, the term mental health is just a big term, and for the time period when I was growing up, really the late 80s, 90s is when I was in high school and college. That term is very taboo. And I'm from a very small town where, I was from a prominent family. You just don't talk about those things. And if we don't think about them and we don't address them, they're probably not happening. That's kind of the mentality. I think anybody from a small town and really a large town, I mean, that is not uncommon. So I just think that for me personally, not being able to talk about it was hard. But I did go to counseling in college and in high school. Mm-hmm. You'll find sometimes I'll trail off on my comments, so you may have to keep me reeled in.
No, that's okay. That is okay. But I'm just curious to know more about how did it affect you more in a professional setting? Because I think like with the masking of it, you felt like you had to mask at home. You weren't able to really talk about what was going on inside of your head. And that's even in a personal setting. So I can't imagine, how difficult that actually, I can't imagine how that is because we've actually talked offline about that. But, having to continue to mask your emotions and the mental health struggles that you were going through in a professional setting, what was that like? Did you feel suffocated?
I think as a woman, when you're going through a pregnancy, that is a time when you have to, where it's awkward, where people do not, it's just very uncomfortable for them. And then you add the fact that I was in a male-dominated environment. I was often the only woman at the table and or in the room. And the men that I worked around at the time of Mitchell's diagnosis and during his illness, most of them were baby boomer generation. And so they did not, the people around me just really, they were sorry that Mitchell was sick. They did not have a full understanding of the depth of what was happening. Mm-hmm. And so, and I still had a business that I was running. I had to earn income. I had, it was just, nothing prepares you for it. There's no rule book. And so I just didn't always feel comfortable, go into meetings and they'd say, oh, how's the baby? How's the baby? Okay. And then I had to continue on. And that wore on me because I would leave meetings and go back to the hospital where children were dying. My child was crying, had an infant who would just cry and cry and cry for hours sometimes. And that, you just could not soothe your child because of what was happening to his body with treatment. And so in time, that really became very hard. I got tired of people telling me how strong I was. Mm-hmm. I got tired of the pat on the back, oh, you're just doing such a great job. And, it felt very superficial. It felt patronizing at times. And about a year into Mitchell's treatment, I actually saw the first child die. I did not witness the actual death, but I saw the child on life support. It was very intense. It was mm-hmm. extremely intense. And that's when I was just done. I was done playing with the mask. I was tired of going in places. And so I called my hairdresser against my family. All was really worried about me. And I insisted I was not having a breakdown. And, but I now realize it was definitely a breakdown. And I shaved my head. Completely bald. And it was the most liberating thing I have ever done. It was just, I felt as though all this weight of stress, because anybody who deals with heavy anxiety or depression or stress, there's a physical impact to all of that. Mm-hmm. By shaving my head, it was as though this energy was able to leave me. It just was very freeing. And, but it was, it scared people. They realized I would go into my Rotary Club meeting, I would go into business meetings, and it was very intense for them. But for me, it was a way to shock them the way that I was being shocked.
Yeah. So to kind of unpack your, your experience in the professional setting, because I think, with the misconception that you have to be buttoned up, whether that's in your workplace or I know you were part of like the Rotary and then had some other, initiatives going on. There's this huge misunderstanding that you have to be buttoned up all of the time, right? And I think a lot of people, I'm sure that they understood that what you were going through, but they didn't understand the emotional and the mental kind of barriers that was going to put on you. So what are your overall thoughts about that misconception about having to stay buttoned up all of the time in these, what we would consider professional settings?
Well, I think as younger generations come into the workforce and some of the older generations retire from the workforce, I see that button up feeling loosening some. I think we are becoming more open to discussing how we feel, how's your day going, really sharing with people. I think our society in general suffers from a severe lack of empathy. I think that people, it's not their problem. They don't really care. That is not the way I operate. It's hard for me to fully understand that, but I have experienced that a lot. People just don't care. They are not interested in what I've been through, or they aren't interested in how it affects me. They, if it starts to impact them, they don't want anything to do with it. So I think the lack of empathy and education on empathy, that's one of the things I hope to do with this, is have people realize that, one, this can happen to anybody, like mental health illness, not the death of a child or the illness of a child, but a severe trauma, an accident. Lots of COVID is a trauma. But I want people to realize that, you have to try to understand what the person is going through and give people some grace sometimes.
Yeah, I think it's beautiful that you say that, and I'm hearing that come out a lot. Is one of our previous speakers, Meg McElwain. He taught me that you have to go into conversations with grace, and I think that that's just a beautiful way of looking at it. Is, you may not understand what the person is going through, and you may not know how to be empathetic towards that, but all that we can do is being able to go into conversations that are heavy, such as trauma and mental health, and just being able to approach that with grace is what we should be able to offer each other. I think what we've also touched on a lot in this conversation is, mental health is taboo to talk about, especially with like the older generations. And then, the experiencing of having to mask, kind of what you're going through and having to put on this happy face going into work. Why do you think that, that this is still the case? Why is mental health or emotional trauma, why is that something that is still taboo to talk about? And why do you think it is that people, if it starts to affect them, like you said, that they don't want any part of it? Why do you think that is, besides just people have a lack of empathy?
Well, I think there's a stigma that goes back further than I can even, with terms like crazy. Where I'm from, Mississippi, we would say she's got snakes in her head, things like that, kind of tongue in cheek, but really, if you're using a phrase like that toward a person, there's a real good chance they're struggling with something internally and they need a little bit of grace. Yeah. So I think I think it creates a perception. I think the stigma, and I think there's a lack of education in how far, and of course, now I am not a doctor. I am just a person who has struggled. So I want to make that clear that I'm not a doctor, but I do think there is a lack of education with how psychotherapy and psychology has advanced and medications. I'll give you an example. In the 90s, I was diagnosed with ADHD, so early college. The way they tried to medicate me or find my medicine, it was like, here, try this, here, try this, here, try this. Now there are tests that doctors can run to determine which medication is going to work most likely best for you if that is needed.
Mhm.
And it just makes the treatment process from that perspective a lot smoother. I think if people understood that medication, especially for anxiety and depression, I think that's probably the most common. But medication is not something to be afraid of. It can help you. It has
Mhm.
helped me greatly. I was already taking some medication when Mitchell was diagnosed, and they, of course, increased that. But I think, you know, I think the stigma that has been given to mental health and people who struggle personally is part of why it's so taboo. People don't want to get help. And also access to help has not always been as easy. I mean, it's definitely something that is coming further. I really like seeing the different apps that you can log into to get, I'm seeing more advertisements for those. So I think access to quality psychologists and, therapists is very important. And I think, once people start experiencing how good treatment can make them feel or how it can help their family or friend, maybe the stigma will continue to get better.
Yeah, to unpack the stigma part just a little bit more, because I know that, a very prominent stigma that I'm sure that we're all, aware of is that mental health, if someone's struggling with mental health issues, that means that they're crazy, or unstable. But what other stigmas do you think are tied to, people that are suffering with mental health issues?
Hmm. Well, I think just depends on there's so many different kinds of mental health. You've got addiction, you've got
Mhm.
eating disorders,
Mhm.
you have, bipolar mood disorders. There's a variety of mood disorders. And then you have just someone who may be really going through a very stressful, high anxiety time. And your body, I mean, it not only impacts your brain, but it starts to impact your body. You know, I just, I personally think the stigma that we all have to be okay, especially men.
Yeah.
Men are trained that they are to be strong. It is weak to admit that they are struggling. If they cry, it's a sign of weakness. Absolutely, that needs to change. We are all at our core human beings,
Yep.
and we are also just adults or just children who've been on this earth longer. And so I feel like we need to normalize that it's okay to express your emotions, and
Mhm.
it's healthy to express your emotions. And one thing, I have a middle school child. I have a child in sixth grade, and especially with COVID, with the virtual learning, they started a morning exercise that they would talk about their moods and that type of thing. And I think by teaching the next generation, and I love that it is in some sort of a curriculum base.
Mhm.
They're not just relying on the home. I mean, all education begins in the home, whether that's positive or negative. But I like seeing that our school system is starting to make strides in this area so that they can educate the next generation.
Yeah, there is one note that I definitely, like that you kind of talked about is just this toxic masculinity narrative that I think is just really not. It's not healthy for the men in our society to constantly think that they have to be buttoned up and they have to be okay all of the time. I was actually just having that conversation with someone on my team about it, and just being able to show your emotions organically and authentically, because with me, like, I am a big crybaby. You can ask my boss, like, I will cry, I will let you know how I feel. But, I think with, male employees, I think they have a harder time being candid. Like, if something is wrong, they're not always quick to show it. So, and another point that I think you made on that as well is just at the end of the day, we're all human beings, right? Like, that seems like such an easy thing to think about. Like, we're all just people, regardless of our gender or our race, our our class, whatever the case may be, we are all still people. And I think we all deserve to have, equal treatment in the sense of, having someone be there, emotionally there for you when you are struggling with mental health. So I think that was just really powerful that you touched on that. So to kind of like transition more into the resiliency part, because listening to you talk is just amazing. And the fact that you were just so candid about your experiences, and then, with mental health, and then with different medicines that you've tried out. Like, I just think your level of being candid and open and honest about it is something that I think can help a lot of different people. So what do you feel like you have learned along the way, in order to start being more open and honest about your struggles with mental health?
Oh gosh. Well, I think, what have I learned? Well, first of all, only 7% of Americans have lost a child, and so
Mhm.
what I've been through is very rare. And I think any mother who has experienced what I've experienced, and I operate a lot in with other mothers, momcologists, that's what we call ourselves, mothers of children with cancer, or someone who's lost a child. You take on, there are times you almost feel superhuman. It's, you are so intensely trying to save your child's life, and you will do anything to do it. And that is a very intense level of stress. The stress hormone that was being released throughout Mitchell's illness really impacted me. And I think when he died, for me personally, there's nothing else. I'm not scared of anything. There is nothing else that is going to be as bad as what I've been through. Losing my child and living without him, and really the loss and what I witnessed. I
Mhm.
went through a lot of the process alone. My marriage was in very bad shape during the time. My parents are not living. So it was a very lonely, it built great independence. Almost, I'm a little afraid of myself. I'm so independent. I feel like I just don't need anybody, but I do need people, and I want people around me. But I think it was to a point where nothing else could ever be that bad. And what did I have to lose? That's how I approach most things. What do I have to lose? Really nothing. I've lost the greatest.
Yeah. I kind of want to unpack a little bit on the hyper independence part, because I think a lot of people, can relate in the sense of they also feel like they don't have to rely on anyone, that they don't need anyone for emotional support, whatever type of other support that they would need them. And then you say, yes, I am independent, but I also need to recognize that I need people as well. So can you expand on that just a little bit more, for the people that are also like just super hyper independent, like being able to let your guard down and realize that you need support too?
Well, I would love to tell you that I have mastered this, but I have not. It's something that I work through now. I'm midlife, whether I like it or not. And I have found myself, living independently. I do have, of course, my son is here with me, and I have a dog who is wandering around at my feet right now.
Mhm.
And I really, after what I've been through, I know I can do anything on my own. And I have really low tolerance for drama. I have low tolerance for anything that is not very authentic. I want authentic communication. Um, I, but I don't know the answer to that. I mean, because I was raised to be independent. I was raised by a single mom. I was born during the women's movement. So, in the 70s. So my mom taught me, don't ever depend on anybody. You can always do it yourself.
Mhm.
I don't know. I think letting my guard down to let people really get close to me is hard, because I've been hurt so many times. I have
Mhm.
been hurt so much, and we all have. I mean, I'm not the only person, But I do know I need people. I've learned to just surround myself with people. I saw something the other day that said, you've got to learn who is in your corner and who's just in your business. And that is something I have really, in the past 2 years, I've worked to remove toxic relationships. Unfortunately, a couple were family. And, I think you can do that without really coming to major blows about it, but just back away. You don't have to have a huge fight, but just remove people that are not on your team. And once I was able to do that, the first time and I kind of got used to it for about a month, I was like, this feels so good. Now, if I even get the feeling you are hating on me, it's such a slang term, but it's the truth. I mean, people are haters, and sometimes haters are in our family. Or if you are, you really bring a lot of drama into my life. If I can't really then I'm going to remove you. And that's a very healthy thing. It's not selfish. Some might tell you it is, but your therapist will tell you it is not.
Yeah, I kind of want to go down that little rabbit hole with you as well, because I think setting boundaries is something I'm definitely learning to do, and it's really good for your mental health as well. Because I think part of mental health as well is the people that we surround ourselves with, and if we can't be open and genuine about our feelings with them, and we feel like we have to mask ourselves not only around our coworkers and our bosses, but then we have to come home into our circle of friends or family and feel like we also have to mask. I think that can be very detrimental to someone's mental health too. So tell us a little bit more about how you were able to set those boundaries with people. And it doesn't have to be any specific story about a specific person, but how were you able to come to the understanding of, I love you, and you may be my family or my friend, but you are not good for my mental health. I have to set this boundary with you.
I think in my case, the specific things I'm thinking of, and I won't go into a lot of detail, I had people who verbalized negativity toward me, really negative things that were almost unbelievable that they would say. And now this is related to losing my child. And I still have people say things, if you've got somebody that has lost a child, you don't ever want to say something like, you need to get past it, you need to get over it, related to anything that is associated with the death of their child. Mm-hmm. I think, for me, people verbalized, and I've always had a very strong personality. I'm very outspoken. I have been my entire life, but I am even more so now. And I think, I will say to people, you are about to you're about to step over a boundary that is, I don't want to have to say that to people, but if the situation happens face to face, I'm very clear, you are going to overstep a boundary, and you need to stop now. And that has gotten easier. But I think just removing people from your social media. I mean, social media has an energy. And for me personally, social media is a lot about my work. But it's also personal connection too. And so I think, limiting people that are going to bring you stress, if you think people are just watching you and hating on you, it's okay to set the boundary. It's healthy.
Yeah. So now I kind of want to talk to you a little bit more about, the resiliency side of it. You said earlier, self-love is not selfish. Let's unpack that, because I think, and you mentioned it at the very beginning, and I don't know who else on the call can relate to this, or that grew up maybe in the same time era, or maybe just come from a small town. I know me and you connect on that, but you said self-love isn't selfish, but growing up, that's kind of the connotation that I was raised under, that you were raised under, and I'm sure a lot of you on the call were also raised under. What are your thoughts on self-love isn't selfish, and how can we start to unlearn what we learned then in our childhood, what the narrative that was set in, don't be selfish, into relearning that no, but loving myself is not self. You know what I'm trying to say.
Yeah,
I'll let you unpack.
So first, I want to just talk about what self-love means to me personally. To me, it means taking care of my body, which helps take care of my mind. Keeping my home life stable, my environment, having some control over my environment. Just again, setting boundaries and not allowing people who are going to disrupt my peace, limit or don't allow them in. I think for me personally, the self-love and resilience, a lot of it starts with my morning routine. And, I mentioned that Mitchell, I had just had Mitchell. So of course, postpartum, when he was diagnosed, I was overweight, which is very normal for a woman who's just had a child. And then I go into the hospital setting where I sit, and it just is highly, was not getting any exercise, was eating, was drinking more than I should. Just lots of things. So my physical health declined. When Mitchell died, not long after his death, about 6 months after his death, I was like, okay, I've got to get out of bed. I've got to get up and get back into the world. And so one of the first things I did was come up with an exercise plan. And I was fortunate enough to be able to work with a trainer for the beginning. And I was very selfish with that time. It was in the morning. At the time, my living son was just in elementary school, and his drop off was, you could drop your child off at 7:30. That baby was at the door at 7:30. And even though the bell didn't ring till later, he was there at 7:30, and I was off to the gym. I refused meetings. I did not go to networking events for 2 or 3 years because I knew that consistency was not only important to helping me achieve my health, but my mental health. Exercise for me is as much mental as it is physical. And so just being really selfish with what time during your day is going to benefit where you want to go. So I think, exercise and music. Music I was raised in a musical family. I'm from Mississippi, where the Delta blues, Southern rock. So, I really spent a lot of time growing up on music. And so music has really helped me. It depends on my mood. I may listen to Christian. I may listen to classical. I may listen to country. I may listen to gangster rap. It just depends on, this morning it was Tupac. And so, I think, music really has the ability to change your mood. In so many ways, whether it's the lyrics, whether it reminds you of something, whether it's just the beat. So, those are two things. The exercise in my morning routine is so important to me.
So are those all still things that, because I know you were saying kind of like what you were getting into, like the routines that you were setting when you were postpartum, are those still habits that you are still practicing to this day?
Yes. With COVID, even, gyms closed, and that was kind of like, I work from home. So that was like a social outlet for me. Not really, I didn't really go to socialize, but just to get out of the house. And so it was, I bought my own equipment off Amazon. And so I have an elliptical and a bike in my house. I have weights. I actually am working harder here in my house than I was going to the gym and I've realized how much time I'm saving by not driving to the gym. So yes, my morning routine is just, and I try to spend about an hour. And then of course I have a dog that is a large black lab. So he requires exercise. So I take him. But I've learned that type of exercise is just icing on the cake, because that's his walk. Trust me, he takes over and he controls. He wants to sniff everything. So the getting my cardio, and I'm really added weights in, it's just so important.
So you briefly touched on, how you've been navigating COVID. And I think I kind of want to touch on this a little bit, because if there's one thing that we can all understand on this call, it is COVID and just the unexpected nature of this entire scenario for us all. how are you able to stay resilient during, the lockdown and through the bad days where we were all just shut up in our houses? How were you able to navigate? Were you experiencing mental health issues during the lockdown, during quarantine? And then how are you able to find resiliency? I'm sure it also has to do with like the habits that you were picking up. But how else were you able to kind of handle this such a unique scenario?
Well, so I've said to many people that when COVID happened, it was very similar to what Mitchell's diagnosis felt like.
Mm.
The world just stopped.
Yeah.
The rug was completely snatched out from under me. There was complete uncertainty about the future. We were concerned about germs. When Mitchell was here and sick, when he was neutropenic, which is when your immune system, they basically tear you down so you can rebuild a healthy immune system. We wore masks, we wore gloves. I was required, when changing his diaper, every diaper, I had to wear gloves and a mask because the chemo would come out in his diaper. And so I had to protect myself. And we had to, it was just, and I had to put his diapers in hazardous waste bags for the hospital to take. It was just really hard. So COVID is, I kind of had some PTSD. I mean, I actually had an appointment with my doctor right after because my anxiety and it really went up high. But I had been in a place before, a place in my life where I was completely out of control. I'd had no control over my schedule. So for our family and, my former husband and my living child, we all three talked about how for us, and I've talked about it with some other cancer families, COVID was very similar. So I guess in some ways I was a little bit prepared. So I don't know that I'm a great person, but I think I can have empathy for people who really have struggled more during COVID because I feel like this is kind of my second go around. I feel like I went through, our family, we decided, and even though my former husband and I are not married, we still consider ourselves a family. We're raising our living son together, but we decided together, we're not going to stress out about school. We are not going to scream at this child to do work that he really isn't equipped to do online. Because of course, virtual school was our biggest thing. And we were like, if he stays in sixth grade another year, you know what? That's just one more year before I have to send him off to college, that I get to keep that baby close to me. Mm-hmm. I got a mama's boy. So, but COVID is very similar to what we experience and what any family with a child with cancer would experience.
Yeah. I feel like this one is a little bit kind of like what we were talking about earlier. So I apologize if I'm kind of jumping all over the place.
That's
but
okay.
I love that you are following me. But so, talk about more about, let me back up. So I know you're extremely candid, not only when you're speaking, but just even on your social medias. And you posted the other day about how you were having a harder time, and then how you were able to, like, what you were doing in order to heal from that. And so I find a lot of power behind someone being able to be that candid on social media, because I think social media is a beast when it comes to judgment. Like if you're not sharing, like even if you share good and celebratory content on your social media, there's still so much ridicule and judgment and critiques from everyone. So I can't even imagine what it's like to post something that it is definitely heavier of content, and just saying like, hey, I'm struggling today. So my point to all of that kind of ramble there is, how are you able to be so raw even on your social media and not be afraid of the pushback from people?
Well, I think I'm going to tie this back to my faith, because I think there's a reason this happened to me, and what I do with the pain and what I do with the struggle and the trauma is, what I want to do is help other people and show people that, even though I have this big bright smile and I've got my makeup on and, my jewelry and all that, I struggle every day. I also feel like people cut me a little bit more slack with my anxiety and depression because well, you lost a child, you have an excuse. Well, guess what? Somebody who lost somebody in a car accident, or someone who is going through a major divorce, or, trauma is different to every person. Every person's mental health and the way they handle it is unique to themselves. There are certain tools that you can put in place, but at the end of the day, it is a unique deal that you personally have to find what therapy method, what lifestyle. I'm a firm believer that lifestyle plays into mental health, whether it's positive or negative. But I'm starting to ramble a little bit. But,
Okay.
I think when I do that, I'll also say I spend more time in that state of depression than people realize. I often during the day have to go and rest and just take some time for about 30 minutes in the quiet with my sound machine on to make my anxiety go down. And it's not because anything specific happened. It's just it's part of who I am now. I can feel the grief and the weight of the grief whether I'm thinking about Mitchell or not. Right now, one of the hardest parts of the grief, where I am in my grief journey, is not as much missing him, but in watching his living brother be alone and watch him not have a playmate, not have the built-in best friend that, I planned everything. I was going to have 2 children. I was going to have them just like this, and we're going to do it like this. So, it's not as much my loss at this point, because grief comes in different phases, but it's more about my child's loss. And I think his dad would agree with that.
Yeah.
We actually talk about it quite a bit. His dad and I do.
Yeah, you said something in there that I think was extremely powerful. Trauma looks different. It comes in all different, forms and shapes. And I think a lot of people can forget that, or they can overlook it. When you experience something extremely traumatic, and I don't know if anyone on the call can relate to you on that level, but I think what's important about what you said is that we all experience trauma in different ways, and not to say that your trauma is higher than other people. Like, what we all experience, the worst thing that has ever happened to me may not be the worst thing that has ever happened to you, but that doesn't mean it doesn't hurt, right?
That's right.
And so when you hear people give the analogy, you can see, but like, if someone breaks their arm, and then I go and I, stub my toe, that doesn't mean that my toe does not hurt. Just because that is the pain that I am feeling does not mean that I should be, belittled because this other person, well, look at this other person, this person broke their arm. So you need to, stop complaining about it. So I think that that's just really an important point that I think everyone should walk away with from this conversation, is that even though your trauma may not be my trauma or Meg's trauma or, Dan or Lo or whoever's trauma, does not invalidate you, or does not, mean that you are not still hurting. And I think another point to that is, and I kind of want to go into this because we have a little bit of time, and I noticed that we didn't get to it. But we think that mental health doesn't discriminate, and I also thought that as well, but you educated me and you said no, like, if you actually think about it, yes, it does discriminate. But to the point of mental health doesn't discriminate. It doesn't matter what car you drive, what house you live in, how much money you make, whatever. Your life could be completely made, and that does not invalidate your mental health issues just because you have it made. That is just an extremely important point that I want everyone to say. But Meg, definitely, kind of expand on that, on the misconception of, mental health doesn't discriminate, or it does discriminate.
Well, I think there is discrimination in sometimes in the treatment, or, and discrimination might be a strong word, maybe an imbalance. I think someone who is from a highly educated background, who has strong social capital, who has access to good medical care, they are going to, sometimes not, but if they go to seek treatment or if they have some sort of a breakdown, the response to them is going to be different than someone who's in poverty, who might already be homeless, and we know that most of our homeless population, a large portion, suffer from some sort of mental health crisis or issue. So I think, that's where the discrimination comes into me, is in how the treatment is. But it happens in every neighborhood. What I often tell people is children who live in poverty, they are dealing with trauma every day. They are worried about where their food is going to come from. There may be abuse in the home. There may be addiction. There may be violence in their neighborhood. But then my child, who lives in a, I don't want to say wealthy, but, privileged environment. He has great social capital from highly educated people. He has experienced toxic stress in the death of his brother, the divorce of his parents. He's been bullied at school because of his emotional outburst. He's bullied in the neighborhood. And that has been really hard, because I have tried to educate other families and really reach out to the families that are our peer group. And that's where I've seen a great lack of empathy. And, my child just got labeled as, my child's just been labeled as the child who has the outburst, or the child that wants to fight. But it's really it's really more of his response to not being able to express his feelings. I think it does. I think it crosses all populations, all socioeconomic groups, but the response, that's where it's differentiated, I think.
Yeah. We have a question from the audience, and as we are coming down to time, if you do have any questions for Meg, please do put them in the chat so we can get all of your questions answered today. But from Emily, she asks, what advice would you give to help us in work settings to acknowledge but not overstep coworkers enduring traumatic personal events?
So let me make sure I understand. So you have a coworker who's experienced a trauma and you want to speak to him about it, but you don't want to overstep a boundary. Am I interpreting the question correctly?
Emily, feel
Yes.
free to answer. Yes, I think so.
Okay. I think, one thing my minister said at Mitchell's funeral was, he addressed the crowd. He's like, what do you say to a family like this? What you say is, I love you. I'm with you. I'm thinking about you. They're in a better place. Leave that alone. You need to move past it. If you're gonna, don't give people advice, because that's where you start overstepping. But I think just say, I love you. And I mean, if I love you is appropriate. I mean, I tell lots of people I love them, but I think just acknowledge it in that way. I know you're hurting, and I just want you to know that I'm thinking of you, and I'm here if you need me.
I think that was definitely powerful, way that you can not overstep your boundaries.
And you can even say, how can I help you? Do you need, sometimes when somebody's going through a hard time, they don't know what they need, and they're just trying to get through the day to day. So to come and say, what can I do? That was hard for me with Mitchell, but it was on a grand scale. At any given day, I had 2 or 3 people. How can I help you? How can I help you? And that became very stressful, because you find yourself sometimes, when you're experiencing trauma, you're managing other people's emotions about your trauma. And so that's hard. But people don't realize, I mean, you have to go at grace for them. They are just trying to help. They don't realize what they're doing, but sometimes you're managing other people's emotions.
Yeah. And I think, just offering up a listening ear, I think, is really important as well. Not everyone wants to hear, their comments and, like any feedback or suggestions on what you should do. Sometimes it just feels good to be heard.
Yes.
So that might also be something. I know the question was for Meg, so I'll definitely let Meg answer the questions. But I think that that could also just be good. Just, hey, I'm here for you. I hear you. I see you. I validate you. If you need anything, if you need to talk, I am here for you.
Right.
So
Just start in the morning with, "How are you today?
mhm.
I'm glad to see you smile. I'm glad to," or offer a compliment. Try to lift the person up without being, try to do it naturally.
Yep. So we may have time for another question or two if you have any. But Meg, while we are waiting to see if any questions come into the chat, what is something that, because I think we've covered definitely a lot today. What is the one thing that you want people to be able to walk away with today, just to be able to hear?
If you're struggling, if you're not the only one. Give yourself grace. We've talked about giving other people grace. Give yourself some grace. Go see your doctor. If you don't have a counselor, start with your medical doctor. You'd be surprised at what they can do to help you. And if you have a child in the system, in the school system, a great place that needs counseling, a great place to start is with a school counselor. There are resources, but you have to acknowledge whatever the issue is that you're dealing with. You have to acknowledge that it's real and that it needs to be managed. But I think just to know you're not alone and it's okay to seek help.
Yeah. And you've mentioned this quite a bit throughout the chat. You say, give yourself grace. What does that look like? I think I know kind of a little bit what it looks like for you, but how can we all, in general, just be more graceful with ourselves?
I think if you're having a hard day and you need to take a break, say, you know what, it's okay for me to take a break. A lot of people get so involved in their careers that they don't want to take time off. They feel guilty for taking time off. No, that is there. You did not sign up to sell your soul to your job. You have PTO and vacation time for a reason, and it's there so you can use it. So I think that's the main thing. That I'm having a hair issue. Sorry, friends. But I think that's the main thing, is just acknowledging that we're all human and it's okay to take a break. It's okay to ask for help. It's okay to need to rest. It's okay. You're going to be okay.
Yeah. And I think one of the biggest parts to that as well is just because I think with the work situation, I think all of us are so dedicated. We're so hungry to be good at our jobs and to get the next promotion or land the next raise or whatever the case may be. But I think at the end of the day, no offense, Dan, I know you're on the call, but like if I'm struggling or if something happens to me tomorrow, my spot is going to be filled. Like
That's right.
Dan cannot go on with, like he has to go on without me, and I think we all need to recognize that with our own jobs and our careers. The show will go on without us, but we have to make sure that our own show is going to keep going too. So I think that that's just a big note to say on it as well. I know we are at time, Meg, but thank you so much for joining us today and just being super raw and candid about all of your experiences, your trauma, your resiliency. You are God sent. You're amazing. Peace at home. I love you, Meg.
Well, I'm so glad to see so many people here today. I see some old friends. I hope that some of the new people, I hope that you will follow Mitchell's Fund. We're on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. And you can also follow me personally at Meg McElwain. I'm very open about things, and I'm always available to help if someone needs a referral to a good counselor. I know lots of great ones. So don't be a stranger, connect with me, and LinkedIn is a great place. And just know that, this is something that we're going to all have to change as a society. And as I've mentioned at the beginning, I do believe it's going to get easier as we have younger people move into the workforce and into leadership roles and into, adulthood, because they're being taught differently than the older generations.
Yeah. Thank you, Meg, for ending us off on that note. Everyone have a good rest of your night, and hopefully I will see you all next month. So have a good night, everyone. Thank you for
Thank
joining.
you.
Bye.